How's it going, everybody? This is Sean with Lumix Live, and as you notice, we're in a very different environment today. I am located down in Austin, Texas, and as anyone that's been watching the news recently knows that we're in the middle of a crazy snowstorm and power outage down here. So I am lucky enough to be at an off-site location where I have some power and the ability to at least record a little bit of a session for you guys today. I know normally we would have had Shiv Verma on today and done the whole normal thing talking about his wildlife photography, but we still felt we want to get something out for you guys and talk about some new really cool stuff that's happening. And with this particular situation, since we know, I think the last report I saw is something around 70% of the United States is dealing with snow right now. How to maximize the use of your cameras when you may not have power, if it is part of a priority for you. Obviously, digital cameras, we run into every kind of crazy situation of either not having batteries or power or something like that. But with everything going on and the way that a lot of the cameras are built now, there's a lot of tech built into them to actually make it super easy to still be able to capture images, record the environment around you, especially in situations like this where it may be important to you, or it may be part of your job to be capturing photos, videos, anything about the time that you're in or the place that you're in. So I wanted to cover that a little bit, but as we had originally planned, this stream was to talk about wildlife photography with Shiv Verma. Now, as you all may know, we did release the 70 to 300 millimeter actually yesterday. So we are going to talk a little bit about this lens, but next week we're going to have a longer session that's going to maybe go into a little bit more in-depth detail about it, because I know everyone can check out all the links online to read all the specs about it. But I want to talk a little bit about my hands-on experience with this lens. We're going to take a look at some images as well, and just really kind of go over what the idea is behind this lens and why, though a lot of people I know online are looking at and saying, oh, well, it's just a 70 to 300, why this lens breaks that mold, why it is not a just typical entry-level 70 to 300 millimeter lens. It's a lens that you can feel confident investing in. So to start with, let's talk about the lens. So I have it mounted here to my S5. And as you can see, it's relatively, kind of compact-ish for its type of focal length. You have a bevy of buttons over here. So you have your focus limiter, you have your AF/MF switch, you have your OIS, and then you do also have a lock switch for, if you're hiking with this lens and you don't want the lens barrel to potentially start to creep on you, like most long telephoto lenses can potentially have an issue with. But overall, it's a weather-resistant lens, just like we're making for across the board in all of our lenses. It's fit to match up with every single one of the S cameras out there. It fits beautifully on my S5 here, as well as works amazing on my S1H that I'm filming on. But probably the coolest part about this is how much detail went into developing the optic design of it, the balance of this lens, and the general construction of it, to really emphasize that push that this is such a much higher level lens than we would traditionally be thinking of as a 70 to 300 millimeter. It is a variable aperture, which for some people may be a turnoff, but I can tell you from shooting with this, we're not in the same times that we used to be, where variable aperture lenses were typically considered as inexpensive or cheap lenses. There's not really any reason why that has to stay the case. So the amount of energy that went into developing this lens to produce beautifully sharp images throughout the entire zoom range and across the frame, as well as rendering amazing looking bokeh, which is going to play in great for those wildlife and sports photographers that want something in this range but don't necessarily want to go with the 70 to 200 2.8. It really is just an awesome lens. So we've got a ton of images that I've shot just playing around with the lens, and we have a couple of images from Shiv that will show if I have them available to really kind of like show you what the detail is with it. Obviously down here, the last couple of days, we haven't had a whole lot to do, so I've been going out into Austin safely and photographing obviously some trees and things like that. So nothing really, kind of crazy, pushing the ultimate bounds of it, but doing some tracking photography of cars coming up the snow-covered highway outside of where we are. Forcing some really strong bokeh effects with some highlights to kind of show you guys what you're going to see in that background and how the separation works. So we'll take a look at some of those images while I kind of continue here. And obviously this isn't a live stream, but because we're going to be premiering this, or we are premiering this, you guys can drop questions in the live chat. So I'll be able to kind of answer some things as we're going along, as long as I have internet. Otherwise, just leave your comments and questions in the comment section, and we'll be able to at least address some of them either next week or throughout the week as we review the content. So again, I know this is not a whole lot of information. We're kind of doing this about as impromptu as I possibly can and as efficiently as I can given the situations we're in. But when you start looking at some of the information with this particular lens, how it's built, the attention with, obviously, like I said before, the image quality for sharpness across the frame, for how that image quality carries through the entire focal range, so through the zoom range, there is that same push that we've always had with a lot of even our S Pro lenses for the video users, in that at 300 millimeter, you can do a full focus rack. So that's focusing from far to near, and you're going to have the same effects that we have with the higher end lenses, which is very minimal to no focus breathing for your focus pulls. So this becomes incredibly useful for a lot of photographers, which I'm going to touch on that point in a minute, but mainly for a lot of the videographers where you want to use lens compression to your advantage for your shots. Because the other incredibly cool thing about this lens is that it's incredibly close focus distance capabilities, which I'll put a note right in the bottom here. Even at 300 millimeter, when you are ultra close up, which I'll show a shot of an ultra close up as well, it has such an amazing ability for photographers that may want to be doing focus stacking and may want to do this using the in-camera's focus motors to keep your position the same and then just rack your focus through. Lenses that have very well controlled focus breathing are going to produce a much better looking image to work with for focus stacking, whether you're going to do this in software or you're going to be using, say, the post-focus function that's built into all of our cameras. So you have a ton of flexibility there, and I'll show you guys one of the ones that I do in camera with this. Obviously, you guys can't really see much behind me here, but there's tons of snow, there's tons of ice, trees are all covered in ice, so I'll probably do some focus stacking shots out there with it and show you that. So aside from that, with the lens, there's another kind of key important thing that was built in with the development of this, and that is the actual balance of a lens like this. A lot of times when you look at zoom lenses like this and a relatively small camera body like the S5, you run into situations where the lens becomes very front heavy. And that puts a lot of strain on your offhand when you're holding the lens and supporting it if you're not using a tripod or a monopod. But also, it just ends up not being able to allow you to work as reactive as some people would like, especially for wildlife photography. There's a lot of times where you're constantly moving in and out with zooming, and you're panning and constantly moving, where having a lens that may be too front heavy or having all the weight backloaded towards the body can throw off your ability to track. So a ton of attention was paid to keeping this entire platform well balanced to where you've got a good center of gravity with it, so panning, tracking shots are all going to be much easier with something like this. Now that's not to say that the 70-200 2.8 or the f4 are unbalanced in any way. It's just not as common to see that level of detail paid attention to on a lens like this, which again, this lens is breaking that mold of the kind of common tropes of a 70-300. When you look at overall kind of quality, in a 70-300 millimeter lens, a lot of times it's going to be good enough. It's going to give you the reach that you want, but you know that you're giving up some there. So our engineers looked at that and said, well, no, we're going to make it stellar performing lens to the whole range, as we talked about before, but they even went one step further. In a lens like this, you typically don't see an optics engineer or an optics company look at it and say, well, we also need to pay attention to how the starburst effect looks. So how crisp of star points can you make? How many can you make in a lens like this? It just doesn't become as common of a kind of build priority in its quality. So with our team is they put an 11 aperture blade aperture assembly in this. That is also a totally new design for something that we've used in a number of cameras that really produces some amazing looking star effects. And I will drop one here if I have the opportunity to do it. It's a bit overcast, but when you're shooting with this, you know that you can use it for portraiture work because you go to that 70 to 135 millimeter range, you got really good compression, you can get some really nice separation with it. And if you're photographing something and you like having those starburst effects, it'll look great on it. Even if you're a landscape photographer and you like to use long lenses for compression, you're gonna get those awesome effects out of it. So that's about as much as I can cover on the lens for this particular episode. Obviously, I don't have access to all of my documentation on the lens, and I don't want to misspeak in anything that is hypercritical on its build or its quality there. Like I don't have the exact close focus distances, but I will try to mark them down below. Aside from this, I wanted to take the opportunity to also talk about, what I mentioned at the beginning, where, you may be photographing or creating video content and, you want to use an opportunity like we're in here and a lot of places in the country, in the US are right now, where we have limited power. Or you just may be traveling and you have limited power. So one of the cool things with the S series cameras in particular, some other Micro Four Thirds cameras have the ability to take power over USB as well, but with the S series cameras, you typically will have, actually in every camera box that you get, you're going to have at least a USB-C to A, or if you're on the S1, S1R, S1H, you'll have a USB-C to USB-C cable. Now these are the high-speed cables, so these are capable to support PD charging, which is the faster spec or high-speed charging for your camera. And in situations like this, where, again, you may have some limited power capabilities, all you need to work with this camera is something like this. This is a little 10,000 milliamp hour, 29 watt power brick. So I use it for charging my phone a lot of times. But because it's 10,000 milliamp hour and it has a USB-C PD port, I can take just this, plug it into my camera, and whether I'm actually using my camera while I have this attached, it's going to allow me to actually, sorry, there's a couple of dogs here. It's going to actually allow me to keep power to the camera while keeping the battery maintained in the S5, so that I can basically shoot until both the internal battery runs and this entire thing runs out dead. Or if I'm on the S1, S1R, S1H, I can actually run it to where it will charge the battery up internally and 100% just switch over to using this. So you have a lot of capabilities. And the reason I bring this up too, with this particular one, is that you don't necessarily have to use a battery bank either. If you're on the go, if you're traveling between locations, or you're someone, where you may not have power in the house, but you have power in your car. Just like we charge our phones in the car with high-speed USB power PD rated adapters, you can do the same with the cameras as well. The S series, because it is a standardized USB-C power delivery spec, as long as you have the right cables and the right power bricks, you're able to just plug it in and you're good to go with it. So obviously you don't want to prioritize your camera over things like your phone or things like that if you're in a situation like we are here. But if it is part of your job, know that you have a tool that's able to withstand and actually keep up with the demand that you have. So I know this is a very short episode, and I know that we're a little kind of meandering-ish of topics. I know it was only a light covering of the 70-300, but as I said, we will have much better coverage of this lens next week when we are back to a relatively normal schedule. We should have Shiv Verma on next week with us to actually have a more in-depth conversation, and so you can hear someone's hands-on experiences with this lens instead of just my own, because obviously I do work for the company, but I do truly love this lens. This has been a joy to shoot with, even though I don't typically shoot long telephoto lenses. But with that, thanks everybody for tuning in. I apologize that this is an ultra short episode, but we wanted to get something out and at least share some tip about the cameras when you're in weather like this or in a situation like this. Just remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, all that kind of stuff that helps us grow these channels. We will be back to normal next week. I'm hoping we should be back to normal next week. And as always, if you guys have suggestions for future episodes or you guys have comments that that you didn't get covered in other streams, make sure to send us feedback over at lumixlive@us.panasonic.com. Again, we don't necessarily respond from that email address, but we do collect all the information that you guys send in, and it helps us create new programming moving forward. So with that, if you are someone who happens to be out stuck in this current crazy weather, stay safe, stay warm, make sure you're taking care of yourself, and there were a couple dogs in here, make sure you're taking care of your animals as well. And we'll see you all next week. Yeah, take care everybody. Thanks for watching.